Hello, everybody, and welcome to another beautiful Thursday morning. You're listening to Bhavani at iEat Green on the Progressive Radio Network. And my guest today will be Didi Pershouse. She is the founder of the Center for Sustainable Medicine, as well as the Land and Leadership Initiative. And she is just a real mover and shaker. Her books are wonderful, and I will tell you more about her in just a little bit. But first, I want to share with you some things going on in and around the news and share with you some ways you can take action. So I have to just say I am still, on a high after watching the inauguration and Amanda Gorman with her poem, The Hill We Climb. And her poem really just encaptured all of the problems and what's in the moment and the potential for the future. And it was just really an uplifting poem, but at the same time, a realistic poem of all the work we have ahead of us. But it is just such a pleasure to open up the paper and see headlines that are showing that our government is at least trying to deal with some of the issues on the table, such as the pandemic and climate change. President Biden has made a commitment to rejoin the Paris Accord, which is a real wonderful, big move. Our country played a major role in creating the Paris Climate Accord. And so when Trump pulled out of it, it was really a shock to the whole world. Over 200 countries are participating in this Paris Climate Accord. And basically the agreement is making a commitment to limit the global rise of temperature to no more than 2 degrees Celsius, hopefully even less than that, 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2100. Rejoining the agreement is the easy part. Meeting those targets is going to be the difficult part. So let's do everything we can to support President Biden in reducing our climate footprint. Also, this week it came out that water is now being traded on the stock market, and that's a scary thought. Water is not a commodity. Water is a right. We all need water for survival. We all need access to clean water. And private investors have now realized that the scarcity of water is an opportunity for them to capitalize on that shortage and to make big dollars in the market. So what used to be handled by municipal water utilities are now being bought up by investment funds and transferring water from rural areas that have an abundance of water to cities where water is in short supply is now being looked at as a way to make money. And so that is really a very sad thing. I also want to ask everyone to write to your senators to oppose Tom Vilsack as the Secretary of Agriculture. He was the secretary under the Biden administration for 8 years, and his commitment is not really to people and to dealing with the problems of our agricultural system. It's really, his commitment is really to agribusiness and to big business, and he will do what he has done in the past, and that's make deals with big corporations as opposed to cleaning up some of the problems that we have and allowing our natural resources to revitalize in a natural way. So please look at my blog post where I have under Take Action. I have links there for you to actually take action. And I'm really calling on all of you to do that. It's really up to all of us to stay informed and to really become active participants in our government, starting on the local level and then taking it from there. But there's so many ways, and we all can't do everything, but we all can find a piece that we feel passionate about and become active. I want to share with all of you my recipe this week. It's a vegetable curry quinoto. I got this recipe when visiting Peru. Quinoa in Peru is, their main grain. And of course, one of the problems in our global economy is how when grain that is indigenous to a certain region becomes popular in a region that's not so familiar with it, very often that grain or commodity becomes unaffordable for the local inhabitants. And that's one of the things that has been happening in Peru with quinoa. But anyway, this recipe is really wonderful. Vegetable curry quinoto. And you start with a cup of quinoa. I use a cup of red and a cup of white quinoa and mix them together. The cooking time is the same and they don't bleed. So that's a really nice thing. I know when I've cooked my brown rice with black rice, it does bleed and the brown rice, becomes a very grayish color, not so pretty. But the red and white quinoa, or if you use black quinoa too, they hold their colors and they don't bleed. So you can cook them together. Most recipes for quinoa say 1 part quinoa to 2 parts water. I find that makes it a little bit mushy. So I do more like 1 cup of quinoa to 1.5 cups of water, and especially in this recipe because it's going to be soaking in a lot of coconut milk and it will cook some more in that. So prepare the quinoa, 1 cup of quinoa, and then you are going to need 1 onion chopped, 6 cloves of garlic minced, 1-inch piece of ginger grated, 2 carrots diced, 1 organic yellow pepper diced, 2 cups of small broccoli florets, 2 cups of bok choy chopped, 2 cans of organic coconut milk. Let me tell you, when you buy organic coconut milk, you want to look for one that is really just coconut milk. It does not need carrageenan. It does not need any emulsifier added to it. You just want coconut milk. So look for the brands that have that. I know at my local Whole Foods in the Asian aisle where they carry the coconut milk, all the coconut milk there has some sort of emulsifier in there, whether it's carrageenan or gar gum or something else. But in the baking aisle, they have the simple coconut milk, which is just coconut milk. So every store could be different, but I know in the 3 Whole Foods I go to, they have it that way. So look in the baking aisle for the coconut milk. 2 teaspoons of curry powder, 2 teaspoons of red curry paste, and I use a Thai red curry paste that's really delicious. Salt and pepper to taste, a tablespoon of coconut oil, and cilantro for garnish. So you're going to cook the quinoa, as I mentioned before, either according to the directions on the box or 1 part quinoa to 1.5 water. In a wok over medium heat, you're going to add the coconut oil, and when that's hot, add the chopped onions and cook those until translucent on a medium heat. Then add the carrots, the garlic, and the ginger and continue cooking for a few more minutes. Then add the peppers and the broccoli and continue cooking until all of that's soft. Add the bok choy and just cook that for another 3 minutes. The bok choy, and leafy greens will cook much quicker. So any other leafy greens you might want to add, you could add at this time. In a small bowl, mix the curry paste with the coconut milk and then add that to the wok. Add the curry powder and the salt and pepper to taste. Add the cooked quinoa and continue cooking that for about 10 minutes covered, and allow the quinoa to absorb the coconut milk. Make the temperature really, lower the temperature so it's really just a simmer. Cover it, stir it a couple times during that 10 minutes. And then when you serve it, garnish it with the fresh cilantro. And it is delicious. And it's such a great meal in the winter. It's just really warming and delicious. So enjoy that. When you do make it, please, I love to hear from all of you. So feel free to share that with me. And now it's my pleasure to introduce my guest to you, Didi Pershouse. As I mentioned before, she's the founder of the Center for Sustainable Medicine, as well as the Land and Leadership Initiative. And she's the author of 2 books, The Ecology of Care, Medicine, Agriculture, and the Quiet Power of Human and Microbial Communities, and Understanding Soil Health and Watershed Function. Didi grew up in a family of high-tech medical pioneers working in radiation and brain surgery, and seeing the often destructive effects of their work firsthand led Pershouse to pioneering work of her own. She developed a practice and theoretical framework for systems-based ecological medicine, restoring health to people as well as the social and ecological systems around them. And her work is just amazing. It's, so much. And I'm, rather than just continuing reading her bio, I'm going to invite her on and let her tell us a little bit more about her history. Welcome, Didi.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me on. Glad to be here.
Thank you. So I thought we could start by you just really sharing a little bit about your personal history, how you came to understanding the connection between human health and the health of the natural world, because your work is just outstanding. I mean, when I was reading your article that we'll talk about later, it's just so simple. It makes so much sense. And it's just something that I think people don't even think about. So share with us.
Well, yeah, it's a long, winding story. I often say, let's not start with that story because that could take up the whole hour. That is kind of the story of the book in many ways, but of the ecology of care. But to try to keep it relatively short and simple, I worked my first 5 years out of college at New York Magazine, editing special advertising sections, including Donald Trump's and Leona Helmsley's real estate listings and various other things. And that was in an office of smokers with windows that didn't open, very small office. And my health declined really rapidly there. I think not just for that reason, but also because of a lot of emotional stresses that had built up in the preceding 20-something years. And eventually I found my way into the world of health and wellness through the Integral Yoga Institute, through acupuncture, through various forms of alternative medicine, and through various people who listened well to me and were interested in my helping with my development as a human being. So that essentially turned me toward health and wellness. So when Rupert Murdoch bought New York Magazine, I had a choice of taking on 2 jobs for the same very, very meager salary or leaving. And I decided at that point to change my career and went into acupuncture school. And spent the next 25 years or so working as a practitioner in the world of wellness and holistic healthcare, and learning to see whole systems. So not just people and their social environment as a whole system. Of course, that's a huge piece, and we'll talk more about that. But also people and the environment where they're living and where their food is grown, et cetera, and how that impacts their health, immunity, resilience, ability to think well, ability to make choices about their health through thinking clearly. I started writing about that and about systems of what I was calling in those days sustainable medicine. And that came, a big aha came from a visit to Cuba, seeing how their public health and healthcare systems worked very differently from the U.S. And that their health was actually, even in a country where there was lots of food shortages because of the embargo, et cetera, people were actually having similar or better health outcomes and greater longevity than in the United States on a very reduced resources, hugely reduced. So that got me writing this book that eventually became The Ecology of Care. And actually, when you read the title, you missed one word, which is funny. Very many people drop this word out, and the word is money. So it's The Ecology of Care, Medicine, Agriculture, Money, and the Quiet Power of Human and Microbial Communities, which may be a mistake on my website. I don't know if it's missing there, but And money is really a key piece here, because so much of how we care for people, how we care for land, how we care for our inner ecologies of our microbiome and the outer ecologies that we're nested within. So much of that is driven by our economics and the role of money in society, and by people having been taught to take an extractive view of people, of land, of living systems.
Yeah.
So I'll stop there.
Okay. So anyways, just so you know, yes, money is missing from your website.
Oh, okay. No wonder so many people that I will.
So you might want to fix that, because that's where I got it from.
Even I tend to drop that out of there.
So anyway, thank you for sharing that. Well, we know the world right now is really kind of messed up. There's so many problems, and I think people are, really wondering, where to start. What would you say are the big priorities? What are the big interventions you think would get the world going in the right direction? When you look towards interventions, how do you see meaningful change happening?
Yeah. Well, one. So part of the story that I didn't just tell is that in around 2014, I actually shifted my career from working on specifically human health, one-on-one and group visits with people, to working on soil health and landscape scale community health. And one of the main things that I have come to realize is an intervention point that is so simple that would make such a huge difference, is if we could have no bare soil, and instead to as much of the year as photosynthesis is possible, to have diverse green landscapes. So that on a farming scale, that primarily means using cover crops and not using diverse cover crops. And diverse is key here. It's not just about rotating crops through, it's about multiple different plants growing in the same system at the same time. And those plants feed the soil, which changes the structure of the soil, because they're feeding the microbial, fungal, etc., whole soil food up underground that builds this infrastructure called the soil sponge, which I've kind of become the soil sponge spokesperson for the world. Another colleague, Walter Jena, and I are talk about that a lot on various platforms. And the soil sponge is the basic foundational infrastructure for life on land. So it's what holds water on land. It's what cleans our water. It's what the biological work that happens in the soil sponge sorts out and finds nutrients that impact the health and immunity of everything that eats from that system, all the way up the food chain up to us. And the soil sponge prevents flooding, it prevents droughts, it cools regions through providing ongoing water for plant transpiration, which cools not just through shade, but also through something called latent heat fluxes. So, and it prevents air pollution, prevents water pollution. So there's a huge, huge number of things that can impact both human health, human well-being, environmental health, diversity, simply by having diverse cover crops. My colleague Walter Jena and another colleague John Norman have calculated in a hypothetical way that just that one intervention, even on like 25 or 30% of U.S. cropland, or of worldwide cropland, could be enough to reverse the warming that we've already seen from global warming. I'm not going to say that is or isn't true, because that's a hypothetical, that's sort of a model, but we do know that it can absolutely cool regions and help us get through while we're waiting for other interventions to help.
Yeah. So, well, the article that you sent me that I read, other species are essential workers. whose economies enfold our own. I found it fascinating how you addressed, the wildfires and how, wildfires are a cause partly of this breakdown of these systems. Can you share a little bit about the wildfire situation and why you see this also as part of the breakdown of this system?
I mean, wildfires are very complex. It's not one simple thing. However, some of the things that I know about wildfires is that when a region, et cetera, doesn't have that kind of a soil sponge, for example, that we were just talking about, first of all, it is hotter, and hotter air for a number of reasons dries out plants, stresses them, brings in new insect pests that can kill them so that there's more standing wood. But also when a tree or branches or leaves fall on the ground, if you don't have a functioning, highly fungal soil sponge, those leaves, branches, trunks don't decompose, and that becomes fuel for wildfire. So you have standing fuel and you have fuel on the ground, and you have less water on the ground and you have higher temperatures, and all of those keep looping back around to become this continual feedback. And that also affects wind speeds in the area. And we've seen in California what a key factor wind can be through all of this. The other piece is that, and this is not just about forests, but in general, that when biological work, the essential work of other species, isn't happening well in a landscape, it actually affects the movement of rain clouds and the formation of rain clouds, which depend on microbes that are in the stomata of leaves and go up with the transpiration stream and become attractants for water that can create something large enough to fall as a raindrop. So you can have haze and mist develop, but you can't get a rain cloud to develop over an inland area without these microbial forces, because you need either, if it's high enough elevation you can, but you need either salt or ice or microbes to make rainfall. So salt's okay over the ocean, don't have much over the land. Ice is okay at some high elevations, but less and less frequently. But microbes, particular microbes that live, especially in forests and probably in some other ecosystems, are what makes our rain. Who knew that the sky has a biome?
Right. Well, I think, anyone who's gone to visit a rainforest and, has taken, any type of walkthrough, especially with a naturalist who might be there, you become more aware of the symbiotic relationships that plants and frogs and birds and all these things have with each other, and they're fascinating. And those symbiotic relationships we have in our body too. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about the connection of the symbiotic relationships with microbes in our own gut, because it's coming out more and more how our own imbalance is the root of inflammation in our body, which is the root of so many of our health issues.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things that I learned in the Ecology of Care, which I was writing for about 9 years, it came out in the very, very end of 2015, early 2016. But for the 9 years before that, I was doing a lot of research into the microbiome. And that was when things were just picking up. It was such an exciting time as people were learning more and more. And one of the things that started to come out that has really become clear in the last 5 years is that it's not just our gut, it's our skin, it's even inside our organs that are not hollow organs. That we have a microbiome in all parts of our bodies and also around us. They call it like the pig pen microbiome that's in the air around us. We have a personal microbiome. So, and that microbiome plays so many different roles in the functioning of our body that if we didn't have it, we basically would just be an empty bag. I mean, our brain function wouldn't get turned on in utero. Most of our brain chemicals wouldn't be there. We wouldn't be able to digest food. there just almost everything about our metabolism would stop working. And that first question you asked me about what are the big interventions I would do, the second big intervention after the diverse cover cropping, and these are not in order of importance. The second one I would do would be to eliminate pesticides. And when pesticides means insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, anything that is maybe a better word for it is biocides, because the human frame of things as pests has been problematic right from the beginning. We've labeled certain people as pests. We've labeled certain plants as pests. We've labeled certain insects as pests. And it turns out these are all essential parts of a whole working system. And glyphosate, I'm sure you've done some shows on glyphosate or Roundup, but I'll just speak to that because it is such a key one when talking about the microbiome. Glyphosate was first patented as a descalant to clean out industrial pipes. And then Monsanto repatented it as an herbicide because it interferes with a certain pathway in plants and in microbes. And they said, well, it won't hurt people because this pathway doesn't really exist in people. This shikimate or shikimate, I think it's shikimate is probably the right pronunciation of it. But that was kind of before all the microbiome research really came out. So they also patented it as a broad spectrum antibacterial, thinking that it might be useful in medicine, but it never came to market as an antibiotic or antibacterial because it tends to kill off the beneficials and leave the ones that are more likely to cause disease. So glyphosate is in our entire food system. There are certain places where it's used a lot, but it is even in crops where it's not used so much directly on that crop, it can be used to kill off a cover crop. So in no-till farming, which is a great thing, but then you use an herbicide like glyphosate to kill off whatever you had planted before. It's used as a desiccant to dry certain grains and things more quickly. So it's sprayed directly on the food. And then it turns out that it's very persistent in water and in air. And so even organic food now has residues of glyphosate because it's floating around and coming down in the rain. So basically, not just humans, but our entire ecosystem is being fed a broad spectrum antibacterial that affects our microbiome, the microbiome of crickets and birds and earthworms and everything. And now that we understand the importance of the microbiome, I really feel like it's way past time to eliminate that particular pesticide. But the whole concept of a pesticide, the whole concept that something is a pest, and I'm someone who was called a pest as a child. Probably most of us were. It's just wrong. It's just a wrong view. It's not a useful view. Carol Sanford, who has been a wonderful resource in my life, who runs the change agent development community, she talks about 4 ways of viewing a living system. And one view is the extract value view. How much value can you return to yourself or to your company from interacting with this system? And we're very familiar with that. That's a lot of our modern society and economy is based on that. The second level up from that is arrest disorder. So that's like stopping bad things from happening. And the whole pest and pesticide view is very much tied to that view of like, let's kill off the thing that doesn't fit, kill off the thing that's in our way. And there's also a lot of good work being done at that arrest disorder level of, stop drilling in the Arctic refuge, etc. But it's very much opposed. It's always pushing against the system below, the extract value system, or it's trying to extract more value more quickly. So there's always an enemy there.
Right. Yeah, I've talked a lot in my shows about glyphosate. When you say they spray it directly on the crops for drying it, I know that's been a big problem with the wheat. And I think a lot of the allergies that people are having to wheat isn't so much the gluten as much as it is the glyphosate. I mean, it's directly on the wheat. And, and everybody, the way allergies have just taken off, when I was a kid, everyone ate peanut butter and jelly. I mean, it was like the staple, it's like the thought that a whole generation of children cannot be around peanut butter, or that there's so many allergies to it, is just, you have to look at what has changed. Yeah. And I think that's, one of the biggest.
Yeah. I wanted to finish that framework because this is really where we're going. No, it's fine. Because we can even in this conversation get in this, okay, we just have to stop pesticides, but really where we're aiming is somewhere that's beyond that. So the next level up is the do good level, which is to feed the hungry and, get food to the, make shelter the homeless, etc. And again, lots of good work, lots of good people from all of these views. Like everybody's trying to do the right thing from their own perspective. And we all can fall into all of these views. But do good, my idea of what's good is different than yours. And we get competing for funding for our do good projects. And a lot of the money that comes into those foundations and nonprofits, et cetera, is from the extract value economy. So we really aren't going to get to where we want to be until we can elevate our view more consistently to look from a regenerate life view of living systems. And in that view, we're having to consider the whole, and we're having to consider all of the nestedness that happens within that whole. And we're having to consider the roles that every part of the system plays. Like what does this thing that we think of as a pest, what is it? What is its work in the system? Why is it there in the first place? What happens if we take that out? What other parts that we think of as beneficial are going to collapse because they don't have food or they don't have this partner to do this thing with? So it's a way, that framework is a way to catch ourselves and check our thinking when we're making a plan as to how to roll something, get towards our aims. So that whole thing about eliminating pesticides is from that arrest disorder paradigm. I freely admit it. But the bigger question there is how do we welcome in all of the non-human essential workers of the world and let them play out their roles.
Right. And where do we start to kind of help rebuild it and bring it back? Because it's been so desecrated for so long at this point that it's so out of balance.
Although it's amazing how fast, if we stop intervening or, provide a little bit of assistance, it's amazing how quickly those balancing interwoven relationships will reestablish themselves. I love that movie, The Biggest Little Farm, because it really shows that very well. So.
Right. Yeah, during the COVID, I've been enjoying taking walks at different preserves that our local land alliance has been bringing back. And, we've been walking through, these meadows that, were completely invaded, and out of balance for so many years. And they brought in, goats to mitigate some of the invasive species. And then, added some other essential elements to the land. And it is just this beautiful meadow now that's just, in balance. And it took a few years, but it really came back. And
that's amazing. That's a great example of that bringing in goats and changing up the grazing patterns of an area is a much better strategy to bring back more diverse life than picking out who are the invasives. And we're both using air quotes here for invasives.
Right.
I don't actually believe that. I think that's a wrong concept. It's another word for pest. So, and a lot of places are using herbicides to kill off invasives or just launching these war campaigns. And of course, in the US, us white folks are invasive species. And we saw Native people as pests who are in the way. So it's just whenever we fall into that, like us versus them thinking, it's just a chance to check ourselves and elevate our thinking to how do we regenerate more life and more diverse life, and how do we let the work of life thrive here? And those so-called invasive species are the thing that can grow, that can photosynthesize and pump sugars and nutrients and food into the soil food web. So we actually want to say, wow, thank you so much for being here. I'm gonna let you not only feed the soil food web, but feed these goats. And then let's see, now that you've done your job so well, let's see what else wants to grow. If we make a little more space.
Right. Well, it's great to have someone like you to calibrate our thinking. Don't go anywhere. Let's take a couple of minute break. And when we come back, I'd love to really talk more about ways that we can think in this whole system and work together. Great. So everyone listening, don't go anywhere. My guest is Didi Pershouse, and we'll be right back.
Tune in to PRN for shows about love, for love, for love, for love. Oh, what else is there? Catch love right here on PRN.FM. Where else? The Progressive Radio Network.
Hi, this is Dr. Cheryl Selman, and I am the host of The Love Code. As a naturopathic doctor, psychotherapist, author, lecturer, and lifelong spiritual seeker, The Love Code is an opportunity to expand inspiration, transformation, and rejuvenation in your life. Every Saturday morning, I have inspiring conversations with people who are living extraordinary lives, dedicated to service, dedicated to healing, and dedicated to transforming consciousness on this planet. If you're ready for your dose of inspiration, transformation, and rejuvenation, then I invite you to join me every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on The Love Code. See you there.
It's the Ralph Nader Radio Hour.
Stand up, you've been sitting way too long.
Every Thursday at 2 p.m. on the Progressive Radio Network.
You're listening to PRN, #1 for progressive minds.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. You're listening to Bhavani at iEat Green on the Progressive Radio Network. If you're just joining us, my guest is Didi Pershouse. She is the founder of the Center for Sustainable Medicine and has a wonderful book out, or a couple books, The Ecology of Care, Medicine, Agriculture, Money, and the Quiet Power of Human and Microbial Communities. And right before the break, I was asking her, what is her vision for bringing back some of the essential workers that we don't think of as essential workers, that are not human essential workers, but are natural essential workers that really help keep our life as we know it going. What suggestions do you have for us for humanity, or starting with our country, to really change what we're doing and look at the whole of landscape as essential? Well,
we talked a little bit about the idea of shifting agriculture and lawns and public spaces, et cetera, to a system where there's no bare soil, where their plants are diverse, plant communities are photosynthesizing and feeding the soil food web all the time. And then part of that is also making sure that we are not using anything that's a biocide, so a pesticide, in the system, because we have tended to only recognize the essential workforce that directly benefits us without understanding that our own health and well-being and economies, et cetera, are nested within a much larger system of which everything plays a role. So when we decide to kill off a part of that workforce with an herbicide or a fungicide or an insecticide, we're destroying the living system that we depend on, and just because we don't understand that work doesn't mean that it's not essential work. Things are here for a reason. Things are here because they have a role to play. Mm-hmm. So, and our own resilience is so dependent on a lot of invisible work that happens under the soil, literally. For example, mycorrhizal fungi go out and sort out nutrients, find them out in the soil in a cubic meter or cubic yard, more or less, of healthy soil. There can be 25,000 kilometers. Sorry, I'm using metric. I'm used to teaching in countries, but that's twice the diameter of the Earth, if you want an image. Of fungal hyphae, of these mycorrhizal fungal hyphae that are all they are doing is going and finding the right nutrients for the plants. Mm-hmm. And a plant that's growing in that system becomes resilient against viruses, very key here, against bacteria, against insect predation, against fungal diseases, and whoever's eating those plants or eating things that have eaten those plants is getting similar benefits right up the food chain. So by making sure that all those relationships are happening underground, we can become much more resilient ourselves in terms of our own immunity and our own capacity to think and et cetera. Because it's not just about our immune system, it's about our brains and our capacity to make good decisions. Right. So,
and in that realm, just when you're talking about, the vegetables that we eat that are grown in nutrient-rich soil has a very different makeup than vegetables that are just being fed nitrogen and magnesium, through a fertilizer.
Yeah,
they don't
and it's
have
not. And I would say, even the word nutrient-rich, I agree that it's a nutrient-rich soil, but all soil particles are full of nutrients. And the question is whether the plant has any interface to access them. So I would say plants that are growing in an intelligent interface, in a soil sponge, in an intelligent web of underground economies and communication, because the plants give certain things, and then the bacteria and the fungi bring stuff back to the plant. So it's like this relationships. Mm-hmm. The nutrients are there. It's like the money's all behind a locked door. You can't get to it, or the food is all in a locked fridge. Yeah.
Well, when you talk about fungi intelligence, I started growing mushroom spores this year, and I did oyster mushrooms, but we also inoculated some logs with shiitake mushrooms. And one of the things that amazed me was when someone was saying, when we're ready to harvest them, or when we want the mushrooms to fruit, the way to do it is to soak the log so that it gets nice and moist, and then whack it with a hammer to imitate a tree falling in the forest.
Oh, wow.
Which tells the shiitake mushroom that a tree has fallen and that it's time to come out because there's good food around.
I didn't know that. That's cool.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. So, one of the things that has been so in the news through this whole political time that we've been living through and the divide in this country in relationships. It's been so right in our face how divided our country is. Do you have any insight in your work and in the connections, on human relationships as to why we're, so divided, or what attitudes are most useful to try to help bring us back together? Any connection with the food system or the whole system there?
Yeah, I do. I have some fairly strong ideas there that are really based on my own embodied experience. I have all my life and increasingly had a sense that all people are essentially good and doing the absolute best they can with the experience, the context, the history, et cetera, that they've grown up around and are exposed to right now. So, and that anytime someone's not acting that way, it's the result of some experience or mistreatment or wrong conclusion they've come to in the absence of a full-on support system that's really working for them. So when we take that view, it shifts us out of the judgment view and into a view of curiosity. Like what's going on here? What is this person expressing about the larger system that we haven't addressed yet? What can I learn from this person's experience so that to help me not compound those hurts? And one of the best ways that I have found to do that is in either in groups or in one-on-one or little threesome groups to sit down with people with from any background and to set a time, split up whatever time you have, even if you only have 10 minutes, everybody gets 3.5 minutes or 3 1/3 minutes. And just listen. So one person speaks and the other people listen. And it's not about trying to solve anything. It's not about giving advice. It's just about listening to each other. And one of the things that we've found in communities that I have worked in for years that do this is that nobody has been listened to enough in life without interruption, without advice giving, without people getting, oh my God, that's terrible. Like none of that, just listening. And none of us has been listened to enough. And we actually get smarter by having a space in which we get to think out loud and share our experiences, try to think through issues, and also an environment where the feelings that come up along with our trying to think about stuff are welcomed. Like people don't get worried if you tear up or if you get laughing hysterically or that kind of thing, that's just understood that that's part of the thinking process. It's part of clearing out stored up stresses and energies, is having a chance to just fully express wherever you're at. And there are ways to do this that we've found are more effective or less. So that's the basics of it. And anybody can practice that. And you will find people will say, oh my goodness, like I haven't felt like this well listened to ever in my life or in years, even just from being listened to for 15 or 20 minutes. So because we're so used to people trying to fix things, interrupt things, change our minds, et cetera, that we don't even get to know what we think. Mm-hmm. A piece of it is that if you see someone's really stuck somewhere and kind of repetitively going over and over the same thing, to try to provide a little bit of a contradiction, a little bit of a framework change of just offering them, I'm trying to think of an example. If I was really stuck in kind of a victim mode of everybody's doing terrible things to me, which may be true, like you might say to me, you're actually very powerful. You actually have more power than you may think here. Or what if you were to take charge of this situation? Or, so we can put in a little comment here or there that helps to redirect the person towards remembering that they're good, that they're intelligent, that they have intrinsic power, even though the situation may not allow them to express it. So that's not the same thing as not having power. So I think if we could work this into our school system, into public meetings, into our scientific community, and to, all aspects of life where people are expected to just let other people talk without trying to always change everything about where they're at, and develop that curiosity about other people's experience, things would change very quickly. That's been true in my life and in the lives of the people around me who have tried. There's a lot of different versions of this out there in the world, but the common piece is listening with curiosity, listening to learn and understand, and listening to give that person a chance to understand themselves.
Right. Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be a paid therapist or anything like that. I mean, this is part of being human, is that we have that capacity.
Right. Right. And I think it also can help foster compassion through that act of listening.
Absolutely.
Because, another thing that I actually only learned a few years ago was that there's actually 2 sets of textbooks that our children are using in this country alone, let alone around the world. But, in this country, the same textbook published by the same company with the same author's name have 2 variations. There's the Texas one and the California one. And states can choose which textbook they want. And in the Texas one, there's a priest that is on the Board of Education, committee. And so it has a very different historical reality than another one. And yet it's the same textbook, and it's the basis for what people are being taught. So when when you say, and I think also people can experience this if you travel and you're at an airport in another part of the country and you see what news station they're choosing to put on, people are being surrounded by what is the reality of where they're from. And so, as you said, people are products of their environment and what they have learned, and it makes a difference. And so it's not.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So I'm just saying it's not always, I want to say, someone's fault if they think in a way that I personally think is different than how I think. They got to that place because of their whole environment and a different reality than what the reality I've experienced is.
Yes, and each person also has an essence that is particular to them. That when we listen long enough, we start to really see the person behind the patterns, and also to experience ourselves as a person below our path. Sometimes we may feel like, oh, gee, I'm just sort of doing the same thing over and over again, and I can't get out of this mental mindset that I seem to be stuck in. But there we do have particular essences, and those are just, every single one of them is amazing. And they can get really clouded over in certain cases by mistreatment, by being in really harsh situations. But when you can clear that away, everyone has this amazing center to them.
Can you talk a little bit before we run out of time? Because I just saw the time. We're getting towards the end. Just what's different about the way that you go about teaching what you're teaching so that people are hearing your message?
Yeah. So I teach both in person and online. And I'm glad that I teach online this year because it's the only way to do it. Through the Land and Leadership Initiative, which is landandleadership.org. And our classes are at lali.teachable.com if people are interested in seeing what's being offered. And for me as a teacher, I really try to teach through embodied experience, whether or not you're doing it in the moment, but really filtering anything that I'm saying or asking through your own experience. So bringing to mind an image of a living system at work, whether it's a human community or an ecological community, and testing those ideas and experiencing those ideas through that. So rather than teaching how the rain cycle works, I'll ask people to think about rain falling in a landscape well, like an actual example of it, not imagining something in the future, but actual things that you've experienced. Think about how the clouds change in a rural environment that well versus an urban one throughout the day and the summer. To think about the last time that you felt you could think really clearly and what was going on around you. What were you doing? What were you telling yourself? What were you eating? How were people behaving? So we're learning from our own experience. So I'm not the expert when I teach. A lot of people want to make me to the expert, but I'm very clear that you should not accept or reject anything I'm saying till you've tested it through your own experience. So, and then I really, really work to bring in people from a variety of backgrounds. So I offer financial assistance to anybody who can't afford coming to one of my courses so that we can get people from around the world. It's really fun, especially online, to have people literally from lots of different countries who then can bring in their lived experience into those conversations so that we can develop that bigger perspective, that curiosity, that seeing that essence, even underneath cultures, and, getting rid of our assumptions about, people from England are like this, or people from India are like that. No, they're actually everybody's, we're all different. And I'm really working with this idea of mutual resourcing, mutual listening, so that we're growing community, we're growing our sense of being nested in larger communities. We're growing our will to know how and when and why to intervene in a system. So yeah, it's people come out of my courses like, wow, that was completely different than anything I've ever experienced.
Right.
And really wanting more because they suddenly feel connected to people from around the world in a way that really helps amazing projects develop too out of those relationships.
Oh, that's wonderful. So share again where people can find your courses.
So the next course it's a week long, couple hours a day, February 8th through 12th, I think it is. And it's called Regenerating Landscapes for Community and Climate Resilience. And you can find that either at landandleadership.org and click on courses, or you can go directly to lali.teachable.com.
That's great. Didi, thank you so much. Thank you for your work. It's really, it's so refreshing to talk with you and, have the other perspective of really bringing everybody in and everybody being right and everybody being able to work together as opposed to, just from the top down as an expert. So really appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you so much. Everyone who's been listening with us, thank you for joining us. Have a great rest of the week, and I'll see you all again next week.
Stay up to date with PRN for the latest on the coronavirus. Learn ways to stay spiritually vibrant and physically strong on PRN.FM, the Progressive Radio Network.
Have you ever listened to Anthony Robbins, watched the movie called The Secret, or read about the power of positive thinking from the perspective of any of the many fine authors who have written about the subject? They all focus on the law of attraction, which governs every second of every life of every person in the universe. Like attracts like, and everything you do, feel, and think about